Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to not screw up your relationship. In fact, we're going to be giving you guys 7 very practical tips on how to make sure that your relationships are as healthy as possible and so that they don't just die a miserable death. So stay tuned.
Tip number 1 is don't get into a relationship in the first place.
It's kind of a crazy way to approach it, but the point that we're trying to say is that every single person is imperfect in certain ways. Everyone has baggage, everyone has issues. So if you want to have a quote-unquote perfect relationship, that's kind of an unrealistic expectation because no one is perfect. And so you got to realize that going into a relationship, you're going to have to learn. Just learn about yourself as well as learning about the other person and really learning how to work together better in a relationship. Tip number 2 is to admit when you are wrong and to try your best to be the bigger person.
Yes, it's a lot harder in a relationship to say I was wrong first. We can be self-centered, a little prideful, but when I've done this in a relationship, when I've practiced this, it goes a lot smoother in the end and it gets resolved quicker.
When I was in Bible college, something that they taught us was that a lot of times relationships are like a seesaw. You have one person on each side, and what happens is when you're the first person to say, hey, you know what, I was wrong, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? What happens is the weight shifts to the other person, and oftentimes if you've picked the right kind of a person, a good-hearted person, that person will then turn around and say, you know what, I forgive you, I'm sorry as well. And so one of the best ways to help you resolve a conflict is to be the first person to say, I was wrong, I'm sorry.
Tip number 3 is being quick to forgive.
Yeah, this is a difficult one. Sometimes it's difficult to forgive in the moment, but we're not only talking about forgiving that one time in the moment. I'm talking about things that pile up over time, where you know what, you forgave them once, but a week later they do the same thing, or maybe a month or 2 or 3 months later, they're kind of doing it over and over, and so you get frustrated. It's easier to kind of hold a grudge and to be upset with that person, but when it comes to forgiving someone, you want to be able to forgive them over and over and over again. Of course,
77 times 7.
Yeah, 70 times 7.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We were talking about in the scriptures where Jesus says, hey, you got to forgive someone 70 times 7 times. In other words, Jesus has forgiven us so many times, why shouldn't we be able to forgive someone else? Now, of course, as a clarification, we're not talking necessarily in cases of like domestic abuse or anything else like that. There are certain boundaries to this, but on average, you want to forgive, not hold grudges, and to be able to have a fresh start with each relationship. Tip number 4 is to check yourself.
Yes, you want to check yourself in a relationship. Are you an impatient person naturally? Do you have a short fuse? Are you quick to get angry? This can arise really quickly in conflict, and sometimes you just need to take a step back, check yourself, and calmly approach the situation.
Yeah, being really self-aware is something that really helps if you can bring that to the relationship dynamic. You know your strengths, you also know your weaknesses, and you know where you're likely going to be tripping up. And so if you know what your weakness is, then you can really do your best to combat that at the very beginning of things before things get out of hand. Tip number 5 is to avoid being passive-aggressive.
Yes, and I generally tend to struggle with this. I see something happen and I just don't want to say something right away or let things bottle up too much over time, and I'm too quiet about it. And this is a passive-aggressive way of dealing with things, and it's not healthy.
Yeah, in fact, when we first got married, she wouldn't necessarily confront me when things were going wrong, but I would notice things were wrong when I'm working on the computer, and then I start hearing a lot of commotion in the background. I hear bam, bam, slam, and I hear all of these kitchen utensils being slammed and drawers being slammed. I'm like, what is going on here? And then I'm like, oh, she's upset. I did something wrong. She hasn't been able to tell me about it yet. So I'll go over and say, hey, what did I do? What's going on? Yeah, if you end up keeping that in all the time and letting it bottle up over and over and over, what happens is it actually will lead to resentment into a relationship. And every time you see that person, you're just frustrated, even though nothing has happened that day, because you haven't dealt with all the previous stuff, because you've been passive-aggressive. That leads to resentment, that leads to kind of a distrust and a distaste for that person. And no one wants to be married to someone, or no one wants to be in a relationship with someone that they distrust or that they have resentment towards.
Number 6 is cheating, physically or even with your thoughts and eyes.
Yeah, it's obviously the immediately obvious thing is, when you're cheating in a relationship, sexual or anything else like that, but you are much more than just a sexual being. You are a mental, spiritual, you are an emotional being. And so you want to, when you're married to someone, be fully committed to that person, give them everything of you and not just certain parts of it. And so you want to try and really make sure that you have healthy boundaries to make sure that you're not crossing the line in other relationships in other ways.
Yeah, and that can avoid jealousy as well from the other spouse. I tend to get jealous really easily. So I don't know if you do, but I do. And so just being open and honest and avoiding those situations, then those temptations can really be helpful.
And something that I've found that has helped, at least in our relationship, is in the moments where I do fail in those areas where emotional boundaries or something along those lines, I come to you and I say, hey, I'm screwing up with this, I'm messing up with this, can you help me? Can you pray for me? Help me get through this. And being honest about that and not just kind of sweeping it under the rug actually helps kind of work through those situations.
Yeah, so honesty. That's another one.
Before we jump into our last tip of the list, we actually wanted to hear from you guys. What are some tips and tricks that you would suggest to helping your relationship be strong and healthy and not really like sabotaging your own relationship? Let us know in the comment section below. But with that said, our last tip is to not talk about personal issues with anyone outside of the marriage. That includes family or friends, co-workers, anyone like that.
Yes, and this can be challenging, especially for us ladies who have a fiery mouth and just like love to tell our girlfriends every deep, dark secret. But you really want to tame your tongue and not talk about your husband's struggles, your personal struggles, sexual struggles in your marriage to other people, and just be real confidential and secretive about it.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you do everything that you can to not erode trust in a relationship. And a lot of times if you try and say something or work through something with your spouse in a confidential manner, and then you find out, oh my goodness, they've been talking to their mother or their best friend about this, and I trusted them, a lot of times that can really cause the person to shut down and not be as open and as vulnerable in the future. And that's not really a great recipe when it comes to marriage.
For sure.
But with that said, those are just a few tips that we thought would help you guys. And again, we're interested in hearing your thoughts. Let us know your tips in the comment section below.
But until next time, we're That Christian Vlogger, and we encourage you to experience faith in the first person. God bless.